"You're not half the man your brother is," my parents snapped. I gave a cold smile. "Then I hope you can handle the truth tonight." Dad froze, his voice trembling. The truth? What folder is that?" "My name is Elias Vance, and at 32 years old, I was, for all intents and purposes, the family failure. The black sheep, the cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties in the grand, old-money homes of Chicago's elite. At least, that's the story they all told themselves, the one they had written for me. For 5 years, I let them believe it. For 5 years, I built my empire in the quiet shadows of a city 1,000 miles away, watching my company's valuation climb into the hundreds of millions, while my parents told their friends I was still finding my way in Austin. Then came my brother Griffin's engagement dinner, and as I sat there, quietly absorbing their casual dismissals, his fiancée, Sophia, looked at me, her eyes wide with a realization that would shatter their perfectly constructed world. But before I get to that moment, that beautiful, terrible, time-stopping moment, let me take you back to where it all began. Growing up in the Vance family was like being born into a competition you never signed up for, but were always losing. Our home in Lincoln Park wasn't just a house. It was a testament to my parents' success. My father, William Vance, was a senior partner at one of the most powerful law firms in the city, a man who moved through the world as if he owned it. My mother, Eleanor, was a renowned art curator, a woman whose grace and social standing were as meticulously managed as the galleries she oversaw. And then there was my older brother, Griffin. He was 3 years my senior, and he was perfect. It wasn't just that he was smart, athletic, and handsome. It was that he seemed to achieve it all so effortlessly. Straight A's, captain of the lacrosse team, a spot at Yale, followed by Harvard Business School. He was the sun, and I was the planet caught in his orbit, forever in his shadow. The soundtrack to my childhood was a single, recurring phrase, usually sighed by my mother over a report card or a missed goal on the field. "Why can't you be more like your brother Elias?" It wasn't that I was unintelligent. My mind just worked differently. While Griffin memorized and regurgitated facts with flawless precision, I was busy taking things apart. Clocks, radios, our first family computer. I wasn't interested in the answer. I was fascinated by the how and the why. My third-grade teacher called me an innovative thinker. My father called it a distracting habit. While Griffin was out charming his way through debate club, I was in my room, bathed in the blue glow of a monitor, teaching myself to code. I built my first rudimentary website at 11. By 14, I'd created a simple inventory management app for my uncle's art studio. None of this registered as an achievement in the Vance household. It was a hobby, a phase, something to be grown out of in favor of a more respectable path. A path that looked exactly like Griffin's. The divide became a canyon in high school. Every family dinner turned into a performance of the Griffin Vance show, featuring his latest accolades. My life was an afterthought, a footnote. "And how is Elias?" a guest might ask politely. My parents would offer a tight-lipped smile and a vague, "He's doing fine," keeping busy with his computers. The word hung in the air like a disappointment. I could feel their embarrassment. It was a heavy cloak for a 16-year-old to wear, and I wore it every single day. I learned to be quiet, to be invisible. It was easier than being a constant, walking letdown. Amidst the cold, polished marble and silent judgment of the Vance household, there was one small pocket of warmth. One person who didn't look at me and see a lesser version of my brother. That was my mother's younger brother, my Uncle Arthur. Arthur was the family's other black sheep. He was a painter, a man who had traded the promise of a lucrative career in finance for a messy, paint-splattered studio in Wicker Park and a life dictated by inspiration rather than ambition. To my parents, he was a charming eccentric at best, a cautionary tale of squandered potential at worst. To me, he was a lifeline. His studio was my sanctuary. It smelled of turpentine, linseed oil, and old coffee, a stark contrast to the sterile, lemon-polished air of our home. Canvases in various states of completion leaned against every wall, a chaotic symphony of color and emotion. It was the only place I felt I could breathe. I would take the L train there after school, my backpack heavy with books I didn't care about and a laptop that held my entire world. Arthur never treated my passion for coding as a childish hobby. He saw it for what it was, my art. "Show me what you've been working on, kid," he'd say, wiping his paint-stained hands on a rag. His voice was a low, gentle rumble. I'd open my laptop and show him the lines of code, explaining the logic, the problem I was trying to solve. He wouldn't pretend to understand the technicalities, but he understood the passion. He saw the same creative spark in my algorithms that he felt when he mixed a new color on his palette. One afternoon, I was 15 and had just had another brutal parent-teacher conference. My grades were fine, mostly B's, but my computer science teacher had raved about a program I'd written. My father, of course, had only focused on the B in history. "A Vance doesn't settle for B's," he'd said in the car on the way home, his disappointment a palpable force in the confined space. I was quiet when I got to Arthur's studio, the weight of it all pressing down on me. He took one look at my face, put down his brush, and made us both a cup of tea. We sat on two wobbly stools, surrounded by his unfinished masterpieces. "Let me guess," he said softly. "The great William Vance has delivered another verdict from on high." I just nodded, staring into my mug. He sighed, a long, weary sound. "They're afraid of anything they can't understand or control, Elias. Your father understands law. Your mother understands art that can be sold for a high price. Griffin, well, Griffin understands the game. He plays it perfectly." He leaned forward, his eyes, flecked with bits of blue and green paint, locking onto mine. "What you do," he said, tapping a finger on my laptop bag, "is a language they don't speak. Scares them, because it's a world where their rules, their connections, their name doesn't mean a thing. It's a world where you can build something from nothing." He leaned back, taking a sip of his tea. "The world needs people who can paint new pictures and write new languages, kid. Don't you ever let them convince you that your canvas is less valuable than theirs. Don't ever let them extinguish your light just because they're afraid of the shadows." That conversation was a turning point. He had given my feelings a name. It wasn't that I was flawed. It was that I was different. And for the first time, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, being different wasn't a curse. It was a gift. The illusion that I could somehow coexist with my family's expectations finally shattered during my sophomore year at Northwestern University. I was there on their terms, studying economics, a major my father had deemed practical and prestigious. I was miserable. The classes felt like a foreign language I had no desire to learn. My real education happened after midnight, in the quiet of my dorm room, where I devoured books on software architecture and collaborated on open-source projects with people from around the world. Then, an opportunity landed in my inbox. A small, scrappy tech startup in Austin, Texas, working on data solutions, had seen my work on a forum. They offered me a junior developer position. The salary was next to nothing, but the offer felt like a key to a locked door. It was a chance to build real things, to learn from people who spoke my language. It was a chance to be me. I knew what I had to do, and I knew it would unleash a storm. I drove home for the weekend, the acceptance email a burning secret in my pocket. I found my parents in the living room, a space so perfectly decorated it felt more like a museum than a home. My father was reading the Wall Street Journal, my mother was arranging flowers. The air was thick with the usual quiet tension. "I need to talk to you both," I said. My voice sounded strange, too loud in the stillness. My father lowered his paper, his brow furrowed with annoyance at the interruption. My mother paused, a white rose in her hand. "I've received a job offer," I began, my heart hammering against my ribs. "In Austin, with a tech company." My mother's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "That's nice, dear. For the summer, you mean?" "No," I said, taking a breath. "It's a full-time position. I'm going to take it. I'm leaving Northwestern." Silence. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. The clock on the mantelpiece seemed to tick louder, each second stretching into an eternity. My father slowly, deliberately, folded his newspaper and placed it on the table beside him. He looked at me, his eyes cold and hard as steel. "You are going to do what?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. I'm dropping out, I repeated, forcing myself to meet his gaze. The college fund you set up for me, you can keep it. This is what I want to do. What you want to do? My father echoed, a humorless laugh escaping his lips. He stood up, a towering figure of disapproval. You want to throw away a $200,000 education at a top-tier university to go play with computers in some dusty Texas town? Is this a joke? It's not a game, Dad. It's the future. This is a real opportunity. Opportunity? He boomed, his voice finally breaking. I'll tell you what an opportunity is. It's the degree you're about to burn. It's the connections you're throwing away. It's the Vance name you are actively dragging through the mud. My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling. Tears welled in her eyes. Elias, how could you do this to us? After everything we've given you? Your brother is about to graduate from Harvard, and you're becoming a college dropout. What will we tell people? This is a humiliation. The word hung in the air. Humiliation. That's what I was to them. Not a son with his own dreams, but a source of social shame. This isn't about you or what people think. I shot back, the frustration of a lifetime boiling over. It's about my life. Your life. My father stepped closer, his face a mask of fury. Your life has been bankrolled by this family. You live under my roof, you were attending a school paid for by my money. You don't get to just throw that back in our faces and call it your life. The argument raged on, a torrent of accusations and ultimatums. They called me ungrateful, reckless, a failure. They said I was not half the man my brother was. I stood my ground, fueled by a desperate need to break free. Finally, my father delivered the final blow. Fine, he hissed, his jaw tight. You want to go to Austin? Go. But understand this. If you walk out that door, you are on your own. Don't come crawling back when this little fantasy of yours inevitably fails. The bank of William Vance is closed to you permanently. Don't expect a single cent of inheritance. Don't expect any help. You will be a stranger to this family. I looked at my mother, searching for any sign of softness, of support. I found none. Her face was a mask of disappointment. My choice was clear. It was them or it was me. I walked out of that room, went upstairs and packed a single bag. As I walked out the front door, leaving the suffocating silence of that house behind me, I didn't feel sadness. I felt the terrifying, exhilarating thrill of freedom. The night before I left for Austin was one of the longest of my life. The house was cold and silent, my parents treating me like a ghost they could no longer see. In a moment of weakness, a foolish, desperate grasp for some kind of connection, I knocked on Griffin's door. He was home for the weekend, the conquering hero on a brief respite from Harvard. He was packing for a summer internship at a prestigious consulting firm. His room, as always, was immaculate. Trophies lined his shelves, a testament to a life of effortless victory. Hey, I said, leaning against the doorframe. He glanced up, a flicker of something, pity perhaps, in his eyes. Heard you're really doing it, he said, folding a shirt with military precision. Bold move. It's what I have to do, I said quietly. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I wanted him to understand, just once. Maybe I wanted to prove that my hobby was something real. I sat on the edge of his bed and, for the next hour, I poured my heart out. I told him about the idea that had been consuming me for months. A decentralized platform for managing healthcare data. A system that could allow hospitals to share information securely and seamlessly. I called it a universal translator for medical records. It was raw, unformed, but the potential was immense. I sketched out diagrams on a notepad, my hands moving with a passion he'd never seen from me before. He listened, nodding along. He even asked a few intelligent-sounding questions. When I was done, he clapped me on the shoulder. Sounds ambitious, little brother, he said, a patronizing smile on his face. Good luck with that. Felt dismissive, but at the time I was just grateful he'd listened. It was a mistake that would cost me dearly. Fast forward 3 months. Austin was a struggle. The job was demanding, the pay was low, and I was deeply, profoundly lonely. I was living on ramen and cheap coffee, pouring every spare cent and every waking hour into refining my healthcare platform idea. One Tuesday night, unable to sleep, I was scrolling through LinkedIn, and then I saw it. A post from Griffin's consulting firm, congratulating his team on a successful presentation. The title of the presentation was Etherlink, a revolutionary approach to healthcare data interoperability. My blood ran cold. I clicked the link. There, on a sleek corporate slide, was my idea. It was watered down, wrapped in business jargon, and fundamentally misunderstood, but it was mine. The diagrams were simplified versions of the ones I had drawn in his bedroom. He had taken my dream, the one thing that was purely mine, and passed it off as his own. I felt a hot, sickening wave of nausea wash over me. I stumbled to the bathroom and threw up. It wasn't just the theft of the idea. It was the casual cruelty of it. He hadn't just stolen from me. He had done it knowing I was 1,000 miles away, struggling, with no power to do anything about it. He had seen my passion not as something to respect, but as something to be harvested for his own gain. I later found out through the corporate grapevine that his project had been a spectacular failure. He had the concept, but he lacked the technical soul. He couldn't answer the tough questions. The project was shelved, a minor embarrassment for the firm, a footnote in Griffin's otherwise stellar career. But for me, it was a profound wound. The betrayal cut deeper than any of my parents' insults. It taught me a brutal lesson. I was truly alone, and it solidified a new resolve within me. I would build my company. I would make my vision a reality. But I would do it in complete secrecy. No one in my family would know. Not my parents, and especially not my brother. My success would be my own, shielded from their judgment and their greed. The failure of his stolen idea became the foundation of my secret ambition. The first year in Austin was a relentless grind, a blur of coding sessions fueled by cheap energy drinks and the gnawing fear of failure. The initial excitement of freedom had worn off, replaced by the harsh reality of survival. I was living in a cramped, stuffy apartment on the outskirts of the city. The paint on the walls was peeling. The faucet in the kitchen had a persistent drip that echoed the slow drain of my savings account, and the air conditioner only worked when it felt like it, which in the Texas summer was almost never. There were nights I'd work for 18 hours straight, my eyes burning from staring at the screen, only to fall asleep on the lumpy couch with my laptop still balanced on my chest. I learned to live on a budget that was less of a plan and more of a daily tightrope walk. There was a constant, low-grade anxiety thrumming just beneath the surface, the fear that one unexpected car repair, one medical bill, would be the thing that sent me packing, tail between my legs, back to Chicago. My social life was non-existent. The few friends I made at work would invite me out, but I'd always decline. A $10 cover charge for a bar was a week's worth of groceries. So I stayed in, the isolation a heavy blanket. Some nights, the loneliness was a physical ache. I'd find myself just staring at the wall, the silence of the apartment deafening. The breaking point came about 8 months in. A freelance client who owed me a significant amount of money disappeared, leaving my bank account dangerously close to empty. The rent was due in 3 days and I was short. The eviction notice wasn't a threat anymore. It was a certainty. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I spent a whole day frantically trying to find other work, calling everyone I knew in the local tech scene, but nothing came through. As night fell, the desperation became a thick, choking fog, and I did the one thing I swore I would never do. I decided to call my mother. My cell phone plan had been downgraded to the bare minimum, and I was out of minutes. I had to walk 3 blocks in the humid night air to a payphone that smelled of stale beer and regret. My hands were trembling as I punched in the number, the coins clinking into the slot with a sound of finality. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Hello." Her voice was crisp, distant. "Mom? It's me. It's Elias." There was a pause. "Elias, it's late. Is everything all right?" The question was laced with suspicion, not concern. My throat was tight. The humiliation felt like a lead weight in my stomach. I'm in a bit of a bind, Mom. I need some help. I'm short on rent. It's not a lot. I just need a small loan. I can pay you back next month, I promise. The silence on the other end of the line was colder than any winter night in Chicago. I could hear the faint sound of a television in the background, the murmur of my father's voice. She was in their comfortable, perfect house, and I was standing at a dirty payphone, begging. Then her voice came back, devoid of any warmth. "Elias," she said, her tone flat and hard. "Your father and I were very clear with you. You made your choice. You wanted to be an adult and live on your own terms. Well, this is what that feels like. It's time you learned to solve your own problems." I couldn't speak. The cruelty of it stole the air from my lungs. "We are not a bank, Elias," she continued, her voice rising with an edge of indignation. "We are not here to bail you out of your poor decisions. You made your bed. You need to learn to lie in it. Do not call here asking for money again." Click. The dial tone buzzed in my ear. I stood there, holding the receiver, the plastic suddenly feeling heavy and cold. It wasn't just a rejection. It was an annihilation of the last shred of hope I had that, somewhere deep down, they still cared. I don't remember the walk back to my apartment. I just remember sitting on the floor in the dark, the eviction notice a crumpled ball in my fist. I didn't cry. The pain was too deep for tears. It was a cold, hard certainty that settled in my bones. I was utterly, completely on my own. And in that moment of absolute despair, something shifted. The part of me that still craved their approval, that still hoped for their love, died. And from its ashes, something new and unyielding was born. I would not just survive. I would succeed. And I would do it so completely, so spectacularly, that they would never be able to touch me or hurt me again. The day after that soul-crushing phone call, I walked into work looking like a ghost. I hadn't slept, and the weight of my impending eviction felt like a physical burden. I was sitting at my desk, staring blankly at a screen of code that looked like gibberish, when my manager, David Chun, walked over. David was different from anyone I'd ever worked for. He was a product manager in his late 30s, sharp, thoughtful, and relentlessly passionate about technology. He wasn't a boss in the traditional sense, he was a mentor. He was the first person in a position of authority who had ever looked at my unconventional way of thinking and seen it as a strength, not a flaw. "You look like you wrestled a bear and lost," he said, leaning against my cubicle wall. His tone was light, but his eyes were full of genuine concern. I tried to force a smile. "Something like that. My office. 5 minutes," he said, then walked away before I could protest. I trudged to his office, a small, cluttered space filled with whiteboards covered in complex diagrams. I expected a lecture about my performance. Instead, he closed the door and pointed to a chair. "Talk to me, Elias," he said simply. "What's going on?" And for the first time since leaving Chicago, I let the walls down. I didn't tell him everything about my family, but I told him I was in a deep financial hole, that I was about to be homeless, and that I felt like I was failing at everything. I spoke in a low, defeated monotone, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. He listened patiently, his gaze never wavering. When I was finished, he didn't offer pity or platitudes. He just nodded slowly. Then he opened his desk drawer, pulled out a company checkbook, and started writing. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It's an advance on your salary," he said, not looking up. "Consider it a performance bonus you've earned 3 times over. You've streamlined our entire back-end process in the last 6 months. This is the company investing in its most valuable asset." He finished writing, tore out the check, and slid it across the desk. It was more than enough to cover my rent and then some. I stared at the check, unable to process his kindness. I can't take this," I stammered. "Yes, you can," he said firmly. "Because I'm not just doing this for you. I'm doing it for me. I can't afford to lose the most brilliant developer I have because of a temporary cash flow problem." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Elias, I've seen the work you do when you're distracted and stressed. I want to see what you can do when you can actually focus. You don't just see the problems in front of you. You see the solutions that nobody else has even thought of yet. His words were like water on parched earth. For the first time in my life, someone I respected was not only acknowledging my talent but investing in it. That single act of faith changed everything. Pulled me back from the brink. I paid my rent, bought a week's worth of actual groceries, and for the first time in months, I slept through the night. The next day, I walked into David's office, closed the door, and opened my laptop. "I need to show you something," I said. It was the detailed business plan for the healthcare platform I'd been secretly working on, the one Griffin had tried to steal. I had refined it, expanded it, and made it revolutionary. I called it Ether Health Solutions. He spent the next hour reading, his initial curiosity turning into focused intensity, and finally into outright awe. When he looked up, there was a new light in his eyes. "Elias," he said, his voice quiet with conviction. "This isn't just an idea. This is a billion-dollar company." It was the moment my secret ambition stopped being a dream and started becoming a plan. With David Chen's validation echoing in my ears, a fire was lit within me. His belief was the fuel I needed to take the terrifying leap from employee to founder. 6 months after that fateful conversation, I resigned from my job. David, in an incredible show of faith, not only supported my decision but also introduced me to a small venture capital firm he knew. He helped me polish my pitch, refine my prototype, and stood by my side as I, a 23-year-old college dropout, walked into a boardroom of seasoned investors. They were skeptical at first, but the prototype spoke for itself. The elegance of the code, the sheer audacity of the vision, it was undeniable. I walked out of that meeting with a term sheet for $500,000 in seed funding. Ether Health Solutions was no longer just a name on a business plan. It was a registered corporation. The first 2 years were a brutal, relentless climb. I operated with a kind of monomaniacal focus. I rented a small, windowless office space in a cheap industrial park that was more of a converted warehouse than a corporate headquarters. I hired 2 other brilliant, hungry young developers who cared more about the problem we were solving than about stock options or fancy perks. Our furniture was secondhand, our coffee maker was ancient, and our lunches were almost always cheap tacos from the truck down the street. My life became a simple, repeating loop: code, eat, sleep, repeat. Often I'd skip the sleeping part. There were countless nights I fell asleep on a beanbag chair in the corner of the office, my cheek pressed against the cool pleather, only to wake up at 4 a.m. with a solution to a coding problem buzzing in my head. I didn't date. I didn't go out. My world shrank to the size of that single room, to the glowing lines of code on my screen. To protect myself, I made a crucial decision. I would remain completely anonymous. The company materials referred to the founder only by the initials EV. I hired a more experienced, charismatic executive to be the public face of the company for investor meetings and industry conferences. It was a strategic move, but it was also deeply personal. I didn't want my name, the Vance name, attached to my creation. I didn't want my family to find out. I needed to build this on my own, free from the shadow of their expectations or, worse, their potential interference. My success had to be mine and mine alone. The grind paid off. Slowly, painstakingly, we started to gain traction. Our first client was a small, rural hospital in West Texas. I remember driving out there myself to oversee the implementation, sleeping in my car for 2 nights to get it done. When their system went live, seamlessly integrating with the regional clinic for the first time ever, the relief and joy on the faces of the doctors and nurses was a feeling more intoxicating than any profit margin. That first small victory became a second, then a third. By the end of year 2, we were servicing 15 hospital systems. We raised another $3 million in a series of funding round. Year 3 brought explosive growth. We moved into a proper office in downtown Austin. Our team grew to 50, and the name Etherlink, our flagship product, began to be whispered in the halls of major healthcare conferences. By year 5, Ether Health Solutions was valued at over $300 million. We had over 100 employees, contracts across the country, and were beginning our international expansion. Industry magazines hailed EV as a mysterious, visionary genius. Through it all, my contact with my family remained minimal. An obligatory, Brief phone call on Christmas. A generic happy birthday email. They never asked for details about my work, content in their narrative that I was still just a guy in tech, probably struggling at some dead-end job. And I never offered any information. I let them believe it. I let them think I was their failure. Little did they know, their failure was quietly building an empire. After 5 years of near-total silence, it arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope, sitting incongruously amongst the usual junk mail and bills on my kitchen counter. The back was embossed with the ostentatious Vance family crest. My heart gave a little jolt. My family didn't do casual correspondence. This was something significant. My hands felt strangely clumsy as I opened it. Inside was a formal, heavy cardstock invitation. Mr. and Mrs. William Vance request the pleasure of your company at a dinner to celebrate the engagement of their son, Griffin Vance, to Ms. Sophia Rossi. I stared at the swirling, elegant script, the words blurring in front of my eyes. Griffin was getting engaged. 5 years had passed. 5 years of 18-hour workdays, of building something from nothing, of transforming myself from a broken kid into the anonymous founder of a multi-million-dollar company. And in their world, life had simply moved on. My first instinct was to throw it in the trash. I had a company to run. A new product launch was just weeks away. I had a dozen critical meetings scheduled. I had no time for this, no desire to step back into that gilded cage of judgment and disappointment. I didn't need their approval anymore. So why go back? But I hesitated. A part of me, a part one thought I had long since buried, was curious. What would it be like to see them all again, not as the boy who ran away, but as the man I had become? There was also a handwritten note from Griffin tucked inside. It would mean a lot if you could be there, Elias. It's been too long. The words felt hollow, a perfunctory gesture, but they still managed to snag on something inside me. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my Uncle Arthur. Well, he said, his voice warm and familiar over the phone. The prodigal son gets a summons. I told him about the invitation, about my conflict. I don't know, Uncle Arthur, I admitted, pacing my balcony and looking out at the Austin skyline. It feels like walking back into the lion's den. Why would I subject myself to that again? There was a thoughtful pause on the other end. Maybe, he said gently, because you're not the same person they're expecting to see. Maybe it's time to stop letting them own the narrative of your life. You don't have to go back and announce your success like some kind of victory tour. But you don't have to hide it either. He was right. Hiding had been a shield, but maybe it was starting to feel a bit like a cage. You're not going back to seek their approval anymore, Elias, he said, as if reading my mind. You're going back because you can. Because you're no longer the boy they pushed out. You're a man who built his own world. There's a power in that. After we hung up, I stood on the balcony for a long time, the cool night air on my face. Perhaps it was time. Time to face the ghosts of my past, not with anger or fear, but with the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing left to prove to them. The next day, I RSVP'd yes. I booked my flight to Chicago. I chose a sleek, modern suit, understated, but impeccably tailored. And I prepared myself for the storm. The moment I stepped out of the taxi onto the familiar, tree-lined street in Lincoln Park, a wave of cold nostalgia washed over me. The house looked exactly the same. A formidable brick fortress of wealth and tradition, its windows glowing with a warmth I knew was deceptive. 5 years ago, I had fled this house with nothing but a bag and a broken heart. Now, I was returning as the founder of a company worth more than my father had likely made in his entire prestigious career. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. My father opened the door. He looked older, his hair grayer at the temples, but he wore the same impeccably tailored suit, the same air of imposing authority. Elias, he said, his tone formal. He gave me a brief, stiff hug that felt more like a business transaction. You made it. Hi, Dad, I replied, stepping into the foyer. It smelled the same, lemon polish and my mother's expensive lilies. Thanks for having me. The living room fell quiet as I entered. My mother, elegant as ever in a silk dress, rose to greet me. "Elias, darling," she said, kissing the air beside my cheek. "How was your flight?" "It was fine, Mom." Then Griffin was there, beaming, an arm wrapped around a tall, striking woman with intelligent eyes and a warm smile. "Elias, this is Sophia," he said. "My fiancée." Sophia Rossi was not what I expected. She shook my hand firmly. "I've heard so much about you," she said, and to my surprise, she sounded genuine. Before I could respond, my mother was steering me around the room, reintroducing me to aunts and uncles and cousins I hadn't seen in years. Their eyes were filled with a morbid curiosity, the way people look at a car wreck. They were all sizing me up, searching for the cracks, the evidence of the failure they'd all been told I was. The dinner was a masterclass in passive aggression, a classic Eleanor Vance production. The table was laden with formal china, crystal glasses, and silver candelabras. The conversation was a carefully orchestrated performance. "So, Elias," my Uncle Philip boomed from down the table, "Griffin tells us you're still down in Austin, still making a go of it in that tech thing?" The way he said tech thing made it sound like I was selling beaded bracelets on a street corner. "Yes," I replied simply. "I work in healthcare technology. Entry-level positions can be a great foot in the door." My mother interjected, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. "Perhaps you'll work your way up to a management promotion eventually." I took a sip of water, letting the comment slide off me. The Elias of 5 years ago would have bristled, would have felt the sting of humiliation. The man I was now just felt a weary sense of pity for them. "And where are you living now?" my Aunt Vivian asked. "Still in that little rental apartment?" "I have a one-bedroom now," I said, omitting the fact that it was a penthouse condo with panoramic views of the city. "Well, we all have to start somewhere," she said with a sympathetic little cluck of her tongue. Throughout the first 2 courses, I kept my answers short and non-committal. I let them spin their narrative. I let them paint me as the struggling, wayward son. I could feel Uncle Arthur, who was seated beside me, growing increasingly tense, but he respected my decision to play my cards close to my chest. He gave me a subtle, encouraging wink from across the table. My father stood to give a toast, a long, rambling tribute to Griffin, his achievements, his success, his perfect choice of a bride. He concluded with, "And we are pleased that Elias could join us." An afterthought. As always, the performance was suffocating, but I felt strangely detached from it, like watching a play whose lines I already knew by heart. I was no longer a character in their drama. I was just an observer, waiting patiently in the wings for the final act to begin. As the main course was cleared away, the conversation, guided by my mother, naturally shifted to the star of the evening, Sophia. They asked about her family, her career, how she and Griffin had met. I found myself listening with genuine interest. She was sharp, articulate, and seemed completely unfazed by the stuffy formality of my family. "Sophia works for a really exciting healthcare data company," Griffin explained, puffing out his chest with pride. "She's on their hospital implementation team. It's very cutting-edge stuff." "That sounds fascinating," Uncle Arthur said, leaning forward. "What kind of work do you do, specifically?" Sophia's eyes lit up. It was clear she was passionate about her job. "I help hospitals integrate our platform with their existing electronic health record systems," she explained. "It's incredibly challenging, but so rewarding. The technology is truly transforming how patient data is shared. It's saving lives." Something in her description, a turn of phrase, tickled the back of my mind. Felt familiar. "Technology is changing everything," my father said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Though I still prefer to have a real doctor making decisions about my health, not some computer." I found myself speaking up before I could stop myself. "It's not about replacing doctors, Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the low hum of conversation. "It's about giving them better tools, more accurate, real-time information to prevent mistakes." My father raised an eyebrow, surprised by my sudden engagement. "Exactly," Sophia agreed, turning to me with an enthusiastic smile. The platform I work with, Etherlink, has actually reduced medication errors by over 40% in some of our partner hospitals. It's because it ensures every single provider, from the surgeon to the pharmacist, is looking at the exact same up-to-the-minute patient file. Now I was paying full attention. The roaring in my ears started, a low hum that blocked out everything else. Those statistics. I knew those statistics. I had written the white paper they were quoted from. Cold, electric feeling shot through me. My hand paused, my wine glass hovering halfway to my lips. "What's the name of the company you work for?" I asked, my voice steady, betraying none of the chaos erupting inside me. I needed to hear her say it. "Ether Health Solutions," she replied brightly. "We're based in Austin." I was so thrilled when they hired me 6 months ago. The company culture is amazing. Everyone is completely dedicated to the mission. The table continued its murmur, but I couldn't hear them anymore. Sophia worked for my company. My company. The one I had built from nothing in a dusty, windowless office. The one that was born from the ashes of my humiliation. She was still talking, unaware of the bomb she had just detonated. "The founder is this absolute genius," she went on, her voice filled with admiration. "He created an entirely new architecture for data integration. He's intensely private, though. Most people in the company have never met him. We just know him by his initials, EV. But the code he wrote, the systems he designed, they're changing the world." She paused, a slight frown crossing her face as she looked more closely at me. I could see the gears turning in her sharp mind. She was connecting the dots. Elias Vance, Evie, the mention of working in tech in Austin. My sudden, specific knowledge about the platform's purpose. Her eyes widened. The color drained from her face. The warm smile was replaced by a look of dawning, horrified disbelief. And then she whispered it, just loud enough for the sudden silence at our end of the table to amplify it. "Wait a minute, Elias Vance. E.V. Oh my God, you're him. You're the founder." Time seemed to warp and stretch, the air in the dining room growing thick and heavy. Sophia's whispered accusation hung between us, a shimmering, impossible thing. Every head at the table turned toward me. The polite, meaningless chatter died instantly. All that was left was the clatter of my mother's fork as it slipped from her fingers and hit her china plate with a sharp, piercing crack. My father froze, his wine glass still poised halfway to his lips. His expression a perfect portrait of disbelief. Griffin stared at me, his handsome face a blank mask of confusion, as if I had suddenly started speaking in a foreign language. Sophia's voice, stronger now, cut through the silence again. "You're EV," she repeated, less a question and more a statement of fact. "Elias Vance. You founded Ether Health Solutions." I met her wide, shocked eyes from across the table. In that single, crystalline moment of truth, a strange and profound calm washed over me. The years of hiding, of working in the shadows, of carrying this colossal secret, it all fell away. The power dynamic in that room, a force that had governed my entire life, had just been irrevocably shattered. "Yes," I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried across the silent room with absolute certainty. "I am." The silence that followed was even more profound than the first. It was a vacuum, filled with the unspoken weight of 5 years of their condescension, their pity, their complete and utter ignorance. My Uncle Philip was the first to break it, sputtering, But that's a $300 million company. The Etherlink platform is in nearly every major hospital system in the Midwest." Actually, I corrected him mildly, the facts coming easily to my lips. "We're in 212 hospital systems in the United States, plus 28 in Canada and 16 in the UK as of last quarter. And our most recent valuation was $340 million. My Aunt Vivian let out a small, strangled gasp. I saw my cousin Margaret furiously typing on her phone under the table, her face illuminated by the screen's glow as she, no doubt, looked up my company. My father finally set his wine glass down, the sound unnaturally loud. He leaned forward, the mask of the dismissive parent falling away, replaced by the sharp, calculating focus of the lawyer. His mind was visibly reassessing every single thing he thought he knew about his youngest son. "I don't understand," my mother finally said, her voice faint and thin. You never said anything. You told us you worked in tech." "I do work in tech," I replied, my gaze level. "I just didn't specify that I own the company." Sophia was looking at me now with a mixture of awe and deep, professional embarrassment. "I am so sorry," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I had no idea. I never would have. It's just everyone at the company talks about the founder like he's this mysterious legend. I never imagined." "It's all right, Sophia," I assured her, and I meant it. "I've kept a low profile for a reason." "He's the CEO?" Griffin asked, looking at Sophia, as if I wasn't even there to answer for myself. "He's not just the CEO," Sophia explained, her voice gaining strength as she processed the reality of it. "He's the founder. He built the entire platform from the ground up. Our CTO says his original code architecture was years ahead of its time." She turned back to me, her eyes shining with professional respect. "The company holds 8 patents based on your original work. 9 now," I corrected her gently. "The 9th was approved last month." Margaret held up her phone. It says Ether Health Solutions was named one of the top 10 most innovative healthcare companies by Forbes last year. "Number 6, I nodded. "We're hoping to crack the top 5 this year." The evidence was piling up, undeniable and overwhelming. The carefully constructed narrative of Elias Vance, the family failure, was crumbling to dust right before their eyes. And in its place stood a man they didn't know at all. My father cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the stunned silence. "Elias," he began, and the tone of his voice had shifted entirely. Gone was the dismissive patriarch. In his place was William Vance, the high-powered attorney, addressing a potential client or an influential judge. "Perhaps you could tell us a bit more about your company. It seems we've been somewhat uninformed about your professional achievements." The whiplash was staggering. The sheer, naked opportunism of it made something twist uncomfortably in my gut. Before I could respond, Uncle Arthur interjected, a fierce, protective gleam in his eye. "I think what William means to say," he said, his voice laced with a sarcasm he didn't bother to hide, "is that they completely underestimated you, dismissed you, and are now realizing what a colossal mistake that was." He raised his wine glass in my direction. "To Elias, who succeeded beyond anyone's wildest expectations, except, perhaps, his own." The toast hung awkwardly in the air. Only Arthur, Sophia, and a few of the more distant cousins raised their glasses. My parents and Griffin remained frozen, their hands gripping the edge of the table as if to steady themselves against a world that had just been turned upside down. "When you left Chicago," my mother said carefully, her voice tight with a strange mix of accusation and hurt, "you never mentioned starting a company." "I didn't start it immediately," I explained, keeping my tone even. "I worked for another tech company first. I learned the industry. The idea for Etherlink came about 8 months after I moved to Austin." "And you never thought to tell your own family about this success?" my father pressed, an edge returning to his voice. I met his gaze directly across the long, ornate table. "When have any of you ever asked about my work in any detail? The few conversations we've had over the past 5 years have been surface level at best. You asked if I was still working on my tech thing, as if I were stocking shelves at a Best Buy." Griffin shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the color high in his cheeks. "I saw you 2 years ago in Chicago for that conference," he mumbled. "You never mentioned it then either." "You mean the lunch where you spent 45 minutes telling me about your latest promotion and the down payment on your new condo?" I reminded him gently but firmly. "When you asked what I was up to, you changed the subject before I could get a single sentence out." Another uncomfortable silence descended. The family narrative, the dropout, the disappointment, the cautionary tale was dead and buried, and no one knew what to say at its funeral. Sophia, bless her heart, tried to cut through the tension. "This is actually incredible," she said, her voice bright. I can't believe I'm marrying into the family of the man who created the platform I work with every single day. The hospitals I visit, they consider EV a visionary. 340 million, Uncle Philip muttered again, still seemingly stuck on the number as if it were a complex mathematical equation he couldn't solve. My father, ever the pragmatist, slipped fully into business mode. Did you raise venture capital? Initially, I nodded. Seed funding, then a Series A and a Series B round. We've been profitable since year 3, so we haven't needed to raise additional capital. And your ownership stake? He pressed, his eyes narrowed with calculation. Dad, Griffin interrupted, looking mortified. I retain 51% controlling interest, I answered calmly, ignoring Griffin. The venture firms hold 30%, and the remaining 19% is split among early employees and our employee stock ownership plan. My father nodded, clearly impressed despite himself. My mother, however, had still barely moved. Her perfect social mask had completely disintegrated, revealing a woman struggling to reconcile the son she thought she had with the man sitting in front of her. So all this time, she finally said, her voice tight with emotion, while we were worrying about you, thinking you were struggling in a tiny apartment with a dead-end job, you've been, what? A millionaire tech founder. On paper, at least, I acknowledged, though that was never the point. Then what was the point? Griffin asked, something hard and resentful in his voice. To make us all look like fools? To prove us wrong? The point, I replied, my voice firm and clear, was to solve a problem that needed solving, to build something meaningful. The fact that it became financially successful was a byproduct. It was never the goal. The room was silent again. A thick, heavy silence, pregnant with 5 years of unspoken words. The dinner party had become a trial, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the verdict was just the beginning. What was about to happen next, in the privacy of my father's study, would be far worse than anything said at this table. Thank you for staying with me until now. Please show your support by liking this video and typing 1 in the comments below. It lets me know that you've given me a like and are here with me on this journey. Your encouragement is a huge source of motivation. Comment number 1 below and stay with me as I continue my story. After dessert was served to a table of people who barely touched it, my father caught my eye. Elias, he said, his voice now a low, commanding tone I knew all too well. My study. Now. It wasn't a request. Griffin and my mother exchanged nervous glances. Uncle Arthur gave me a look that said, be careful. I followed my father down the familiar hallway, past the gallery wall of family photos, a shrine to Griffin's perfect life, and into the wood-paneled sanctuary that was his office. The room smelled of old leather, expensive scotch, and power. He closed the heavy oak door behind us, the click of the latch sounding like a cell door locking into place. He didn't invite me to sit. He walked behind his massive mahogany desk, the seat of his power, and turned to face me. The calculating lawyer was gone. The shocked parent was gone. In their place was a predator who had just spotted an opportunity. I expected an apology. A grudging one, perhaps, but an apology nonetheless. I expected a difficult conversation about the past, about their lack of faith. I was a fool. I've been doing some thinking, he began, his voice devoid of any emotion. This situation presents a number of complexities. I waited, saying nothing. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick, beige folder. He placed it on the polished surface of the desk with a soft, definitive thud. He slid it across the desk toward me. It stopped just inches from my hand. What is this? I asked, my voice wary. That, he said, a cold, thin smile playing on his lips, is a preliminary legal brief. I had my top associate draft it this evening. My blood began to run cold. I looked down at the folder, then back up at his unreadable face. A legal brief? For what? For what is rightfully this family's, he stated, his voice as sharp as broken glass. Ether Health Solutions may be your creation, but it was built on a foundation provided by the Vance family. Specifically, by me. I stared at him, utterly bewildered. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the 2 years of tuition, room, and board at Northwestern University, he said, his voice dripping with condescending precision. A significant financial investment. It was during that time, using the resources and education that my money provided, that you formulated the initial concept for your platform. The law has a term for that, Elias. It's called unjust enrichment. The seed of the idea was germinated on our dime. Therefore, the fruits of that idea belong in significant part to us. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The audacity, the sheer, breathtaking greed of it, left me speechless. He wasn't trying to reconnect. He wasn't trying to apologize. He was trying to steal my company. You're suing me? I finally managed to say, the words feeling alien in my mouth. You're going to sue your own son? It doesn't have to be a lawsuit, he said smoothly, leaning back in his leather throne. It can be a simple, private settlement. A transfer of a percentage of your controlling shares to a family trust. Let's say 40%. A finder's fee, if you will, for the investment we made in your future. It's a generous offer. It avoids a messy, public divorce between a father and son, which wouldn't look good for either of us. The threat was clear. Cooperate or he would try to tear me down in court, dragging my name and my company through the mud. He saw my life's work, my entire identity, as nothing more than another asset to be litigated and acquired. For a moment, all I could feel was the icy grip of the past. The small, insecure boy who was never good enough, who was terrified of this powerful, imposing man. Then something inside me snapped. The last, fragile thread connecting me to the idea of him as a father severed completely. And all that was left was a cold, hard rage. I looked at the folder. I looked at his smug, expectant face. And then I started to laugh. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a low, bitter, incredulous laugh that started deep in my chest. It was the laugh of a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose. His smile faltered. Something funny, Elias? I finally stopped, my eyes locking onto his. You have no idea, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. You have absolutely no idea what you've just done. I left the study without another word, leaving the obscene folder untouched on my father's desk. I walked straight past my anxious mother and shell-shocked brother, grabbed my coat, and left the house. The cold Chicago air hit me like a slap in the face, clearing my head. The rage was still there, a white-hot core in my chest, but it was now focused, channeled into a singular purpose. My father had declared war. He had just forgotten one crucial detail. I was no longer the broke, powerless kid he had cast out 5 years ago. I had an army of my own. The first call I made from the back of the taxi was to David Chun, who was now my COO. It was late, but he answered immediately. I laid out the situation, the absurd legal threat, the sheer treachery of it. David was silent for a moment, and then he said 2 words that calmed the storm inside me. We're ready. The second call was to Sophia. I found her number through the company directory and hesitated for only a second before dialing. I'm so sorry about tonight, Elias, she said before I could even speak. I had no idea what they're doing, what he's like. It's monstrous. I know, I said, and I hate to ask you this, Sophia, but I need your help. This is bigger than just a family dispute now. He's threatening my company. What do you need? She asked without hesitation. Griffin, I said, the name tasting like poison. Years ago, he pitched a version of my idea at his consulting firm. Failed. I need to know if there's any record of it. A presentation, emails, anything. I'll see what I can do, she said, her voice firm. And Elias? I'm resigning tomorrow morning, and I'm calling off the engagement. I can't marry into a family like that. The next 48 hours were a blur of strategic warfare. My father, true to his word, had his legal team file a preliminary injunction, a move designed to scare me, to freeze my assets. It was a classic bully tactic. But he was playing checkers, and my legal team, led by one of the top IP lawyers in the country, was playing 3-dimensional chess. They didn't just respond. They went on the offensive. They filed a motion to dismiss, calling my father's claim frivolous, malicious, and an abuse of the legal process. They attached affidavits from my university professors, who testified that my work on the platform's core concepts began after I had dropped out, funded by my own meager salary, not his precious college fund. Then the final piece fell into place. Sophia delivered. She had reached out to a former colleague at Griffin's old firm, someone who had always disliked him, and he had come through with a treasure trove. The entire PowerPoint presentation Griffin had used, complete with metadata proving it was created months after I had shared my idea with him. It was the smoking gun. It was concrete proof of intellectual property theft. We arranged a meeting, not in a courtroom, but in the neutral territory of my lawyer's high-rise office downtown. It was me, my legal team, Uncle Arthur for moral support, and across the vast boardroom table, my father and Griffin, flanked by their own lawyers. My father began with the same arrogant bluster he'd shown in his study. His lawyer started talking about fiduciary duty and familial investment. My lawyer let him talk for about 5 minutes before calmly sliding a single piece of paper across the table. It was the first slide of Griffin's stolen presentation. Perhaps, my lawyer said, her voice quiet but deadly, you could explain this. A presentation given by Mr. Griffin Vance, which appears to be a direct derivative of a concept my client was developing privately. We have sworn testimony and digital evidence to that effect. We're not talking about unjust enrichment anymore, Mr. Vance. We're talking about theft. The color drained from my father's face. Griffin looked like he was going to be physically ill. Their lawyers started shuffling papers, caught completely off guard. I leaned forward, speaking directly to my father for the first time. This is what happens next, I said, my voice cold and steady. You are going to withdraw your lawsuit, immediately and with prejudice. You will sign a legally binding document, relinquishing any and all future claims to my company, my assets, or my estate. In return, I will not file a civil suit against your son for theft of intellectual property, and I will not leak this presentation to the press, a move that would permanently destroy both of your professional reputations. I stood up. You have 24 hours to accept. There will be no negotiation. I walked out of that room, leaving them in the ruins of their own greed. The war was over, and I had won. A year can change everything. 1 year after that showdown in the lawyer's office, I stood on a stage in a packed auditorium in Austin, not as the mysterious EV, but as Elias Vance, founder and CEO of Ether Health Solutions. We were announcing the launch of the Ether Foundation, a non-profit arm of our company dedicated to funding STEM education in underserved communities. We were pledging an initial $20 million to create scholarships and build tech labs in public schools. As I spoke about the power of technology to change lives, about giving kids the opportunities one had to fight for, I saw my Uncle Arthur in the front row. He was beaming, his eyes shining with a pride that was pure and unconditional. He had moved to Austin a few months prior, and we had become closer than ever. He was my family. He and the incredible team of people at my company were the family I had chosen. After the event, as reporters swirled and congratulations were offered, I caught a glimpse of a news alert on someone's phone. The headline was small, a minor business brief, but it caught my eye. William Vance to retire from prestigious law firm amidst partner restructuring. I knew what that meant. It wasn't a retirement. It was a quiet, face-saving dismissal. My father, a man whose entire identity was built on his power and reputation, had lost both. His reckless, greedy lawsuit against me had become a quiet scandal within his firm. He had become a liability, a man whose judgment was questioned. He and my mother sold the house in Lincoln Park and moved to a smaller condo, downsizing not just their home, but their social standing. They had become whispers at the cocktail parties where they once reigned. Griffin's fate was even more direct. The evidence of his intellectual property theft, while never made public, had circulated among the senior partners at his firm. He was let go for performance issues. With a tainted reputation in the tight-knit world of high-end consulting, he was now working a mid-level marketing job, his brilliant future extinguished by his own lack of integrity. He had spent his whole life being told he was the golden boy, only to discover his shine was just a cheap veneer. I felt no joy in their downfall, just a quiet, somber sense of justice. It was the inevitable, logical conclusion to a lifetime of their own choices. They had sown seeds of arrogance and greed, and they were now reaping a bitter harvest. That evening, Arthur and I sat on my balcony, the warm Texas breeze a gentle balm. We shared a bottle of ridiculously expensive scotch, a celebratory gift from my board of directors. "You know," Arthur said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, "your father always thought the world was a courtroom, that if you just argued loudly enough and played dirty enough, you'd always win." "And what do you think it is?" I asked. He smiled, a sad, wise smile. "I think it's a canvas. You start with what you're given, but you're the one who holds the brush. You choose the colors, you paint the strokes. You can paint a copy of someone else's masterpiece, or you can create something entirely new." He raised his glass to me. "You, my boy, created a masterpiece." I looked out at the city skyline, the lights twinkling like a field of fallen stars. For the first time, the past didn't feel like a weight. It was just a story, the preface to the life I was now living. I had faced my demons and won. I had built a company that was making a real difference in the world. And I had found a new kind of family, one built not on obligation or expectation, but on mutual respect and genuine affection. I was no longer the family failure. I was just Elias. And for the first time in my life, that was more than enough. I was finally truly free. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I hope it resonated with some of you. Have you ever had to fight to prove your worth to people who should have believed in you from the start? I would love to read about your own experiences in the comments below. Your stories matter. If you found strength in my journey, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories of overcoming adversity. Your support truly means